Welcome everyone to another one of our Wednesday security seminars. And this afternoon, we have another wonderful speaker, one with some history for many of us in the community that we're pleased to welcome back. He's spoken here before. And Richard Thiem is a very well-known futurist, speaker, and author who has been working with the information security community in some form or another for, well, really over 30 years. Some of his books have been very widely read and cited in the field. Can recommend his Moebius trilogy that has come out over the last few years as a very interesting read. And if you've attended DEF CON or some other major conferences, you may have heard him give very provocative talks at those. And in the history of provocative talks, he's going to speak to us today about thinking like a hacker in the age of AI. And before I turn it over to him to begin, let me remind you that if you have a question for Richard, then please post it in the Q&A that's shown at the bottom of your screen. That's where all the questions for the speaker go. If you have an issue with the technology presentation in some way, then, or with the class that is associated with the seminar, then you post those in the chat. But questions for the speaker go in the Q&A. And with that, Richard, we are delighted to have you back. And please.
Thank you, Spaff. Thank you very, very much. I was just remembering the dinner we had on the square and what a charming place it was last time I was there. And I'm delighted to be back, and I appreciate the invitation very, very much. And what I'm going to do is tell you what I think is happening. And it'll be a different approach. I'm not trying to give a to-do list of things to take to the class or to the office next Monday morning. It's not that kind of technical talk. It's how I think we can best approach AIs, the best AIs. And even when you're trying to keep up, you can't keep up. And that's part of the challenge of what the AIs are bringing into our lives. So I'm going to talk a little about my experience with it, and mostly about how I see it. I'll add to Spaff, mention my Moebius trilogy. There are 3 books about the life of a spy, Nick Cert, whose handle is Moebius, and I'll mention how I came to write those just very briefly. A colleague at the NSA said to me in the middle of a conversation, of course, you can't ever discuss what we're talking about out there. And I said, yes, I understand that. And he smiled and said, unless you write fiction. Fiction is the only way you can ever tell the truth now. And that rang a bell. I've published 37 short stories and several novels since then, but the Moebius trilogy is the best, and I encourage you to look at it. And if anybody wants it signed from me, all they have to do is get in touch, and I'll get you one immediately at my cost. It's the truest account, said a CIA colleague, person who'd been there 20 years, that they had ever read of what it's like to be inside the agency. And it's a very different world, and that's a good segue into what we're talking about. The world that AI is bringing to us is a very, very different world. And my experience with what I call hackers, and I mean that in the best sense of the term, I don't mean the miscreants working for this or that state agency or this or that independent consortium of thieves and brigands. I mean hacking in the best sense of the word, the way it evolved for us. And hackers, in my experience, are not a uniform bunch, but they share a unified approach. And I'll tell you where I think that comes from. A fellow named Gary Tauber said this, a couple of quotes to start us off. There is a theory that creativity arises when individuals are out of sync with their environment. To put it simply, people who fit in with their communities have insufficient motivation to risk their psyches in creating something truly new, while those who are out of sync are driven by the constant need to prove their worth. They have left to lose and more to gain. They are what we call overachievers or superachievers, because often we are compensating for something we perceive that we lack, and hackers overcompensate by triumphing in their encounter with the machine and with machine intelligence. So we don't have to go back to John Stuart Mill, who said, "So few today dare to be eccentric." Well, hackers are often eccentric, and I think we almost need to be in order to look at things differently. And I'll get to that in more detail in a bit. Alfred North Whitehead said, "The major advances in civilization are processes that all but wreck the societies in which they occur." And AIs, as they are evolving and coming to us and absorbing us into their project, um, they are a major advance in civilization. I think it is a technological transformative event, really quite unlike almost anything that's ever occurred before in terms of its impact and the speed with which it's adapted. And what it's going to do to our society is part of the challenge we have to manage. And you do that, according to Chung Tzu. He said, "The wise person steers their course by the torchlight of doubt and chaos." Well, there's a lot of doubt, a lot of anxiety, and accelerating chaos, it seems, in some aspects of our society. So the accelerating evolution of technology, particularly AI, has now brought us to an inflection point. We're now immersed in what can only be described as a meta system, an interdependent, constantly shifting, opaque structure made up of algorithms, sensors, networks, and automated reasoning processes that are touching every aspect of our lives. This meta system is an emergent property, the product of billions of interactions among machines and people. It is shaping reality faster than we can understand it. And whether it's thinking or just simulating thinking doesn't matter. We have to think differently. We have to think like hackers. The old tools of analysis, cause and effect, linear thinking, fixed categories are breaking down. The speed, scale, and complexity of the metasystem defy them. And we have to live and work and think in a way that empowers us to be effective and potent in this symbiotic relationship. And I call that thinking like hackers. Adopting a hacker mindset lets us live and work in a system that is redesigning itself constantly with our creative input, a system that we don't fully understand and we do not entirely control. So it helps to recognize that as a result of this dynamic, we humans are redesigning ourselves in response to this interaction and neither fully understand nor completely control our own behavior and thinking either. We are the machine intelligence and the human intelligence interlocked as an ad hoc episode in the evolution of intelligence on our planet. So I encourage you, do not dismiss exaggerated projections of where we're going. A guy named Roy Amara said, "We tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short term, and we underestimate the effect in the long term." That's what's happening here, I think. The uses of AI as the expanding user base explores its potential. Every transaction adding to the gestalt are impossible to foresee in depth and detail because the choices made by millions of users alter both the users and the AI moment by moment, and this is leading to exponential growth. So we have to remember what Marshall McLuhan said long ago: there is absolutely no inevitability so long as there is a willingness to contemplate what is happening. We have to fearlessly see what is happening and engage with it. So it's impossible for us humans, isn't it, to visualize the results of exponential growth. So I think we resort to science fiction. Science fiction is how a left brain technological society like ours dreams of the future. But over time, the gap between those dreams and those visions and reality have narrowed. Da Vinci described flying machines in 1480, and it was hundreds of years before the Wright brothers proved him right. Jules Verne wrote From the Earth to the Moon in 1869, and in 1969, only 100 years later, we were on the moon. Aldous Huxley wrote The Brave New World in the 1930s, and now, within a couple of decades, we were doing genetic engineering, genetic splicing, and conditioning our populations in various ways. William Gibson wrote Neuromancer in 1984, and in it, he coined the word cyberspace. I learned flying to DEF CON from the seatmate next to me, who was very young by my lights, that he had no idea who William Gibson was, nor that he had coined the term cyberspace. And that's what happens when you get old. I met people at DEF CON this time who were not born when I spoke there for the first time 30 years ago. Well, within a few years, Gibson's word, cyberspace, which he defined as a consensual hallucination, was on everybody's tongue, and we were all living in cyberspace. So as a result of this accelerated gap between what we can conceive is happening and what is actually happening, what we're dealing with now is the future that is arriving not as a vertical line that we can imagine, but a horizontal kind of Mobius strip bandwidth. It's a result of interacting multimodal domains. They are cross-disciplinary, and they are creating new ad hoc categories of thinking and discipline and academia and disciplines on the fly. Well, this is a perfect challenge for hackers. Hackers deal with this level of challenge and ambiguity the way many of them work with 6 screens open at the same time. So a lot of people are expressing anxiety and concern about what this is bringing to them, or their lack of understanding of what we should be doing with it. They remind me of a Far Side cartoon long ago. It showed a dog up on a high wire, going across the wire from one platform to another. He had a long bar across his front paws. He was balancing as best he could. He had a hoop around one leg that was spinning as he went. And you could see the little faces of the crowd far below. And the caption said something like, Rex tried to remain focused, but he couldn't shake one nagging thought. He was an old dog, and this was a new trick. Now, hopefully, in my estimation and my experience, when we engage with AIs productively, we become addicted to the rush. It's a wonderful book called Co-Intelligence about AIs. And in the introduction, the professor from Wharton said, if you don't have 3 sleepless nights, you haven't really engaged with this technology in a deep way. And therefore, you don't understand the enormity of the transformational engine that it and they are becoming. Well, hackers get high on a breakthrough or a discovery. That's why they're passionate and obsessive. And discoveries and breakthroughs are the meat and potatoes of AIs and hackers alike. So please keep in mind that things that sound insane when we make claims about them have to be contextualized in the real conditions that are evolving. Insanity, like wisdom, is contextual. J.C.R. Lickletter should be a famous name. I don't know if anybody interrogates him anymore, but in 1957, he was speaking to Nobel Prize-winning scientists, and he was shoveling. They were shoveling in the back when he made the most outrageous statements. He said the computers were going to be connected to one another, and they were going to talk to one another in their own language. And that shoveling motion in the back of the room from these erudite scientists was to indicate what nonsense, what BS this was. And of course, he knew what he was talking about. So remember what Robert Galvin of Motorola said? He was ahead of Motorola when it was really at the top of its game. And he was asked what ideas constituted breakthrough ideas. And he said, you know, every idea that we adopted and that really transformed our industry began as a minority opinion. It was often said, probably by a woman, one of the few women in the room then, and no one heard it. Or if they heard it the next time they advocated for it, then they laughed and then they became angry. Uh, and he said, if everybody came into a room to face a challenge and we all agreed on the solution at once, it was always wrong. Now, why was it always wrong? Because he was saying everybody shared a paradigm or a shared understanding of reality to such a degree that they didn't even know that they shared it. And because they all shared it, they all agreed on the proper procedure in light of the challenge they faced. He said it was always wrong. And sooner or later, people would not only believe it and accept it, but say that they always had believed it and accepted it all along. So, what I think we have to do in the face of AI and other profound challenges is build in an openness in ourselves to heresy. And remember what Shaw said, that all great truths begin as blasphemy. So, build in an openness to things you might not have even imagined because you thought they were impossible. And I'm going to address that directly in a little bit with examples of how people have done that. Don't dismiss things that sound crazy the way smart people dismissed Licklider's insights. The first essays I wrote over 30 years ago in the early 90s about what I thought the internet, which no one had experienced until 1993, when it became possible to do commercial activity on it, I said what it was going to do to society, that it was going to reshape every aspect of society and every aspect of our identity and who fundamentally we thought we were. And the essays I wrote first were sent back to me, and I was told literally, you are crazy. This is insane, because you can't think out of that paradigm. I took my insights to the Editors and Publishers Conference, a big confab of newspaper publishers, and said, you need to understand that the internet is going to render much of what you do and the way you do it obsolete. And the response was predictable. Who do you think you are, upstart? We've been in this industry for 50 years and we know the industry. Well, they did know the industry that had already ceased to exist, except they didn't know it yet because they had not seen the implications and the profound impacts of technology. So remember, when you're all in information security, Matt Blaze said that the weakest link in the security chain is the definition of the problem. And the real definition of the problem is frequently not the definition that everybody is working with. Again, when they have gotten into groupthink and shared a paradigm without critical examination of it, that becomes the weakest link that undermines them, as Galvin said. So we have to think differently. We really do. And thinking differently is easy to talk about, fun to talk about, sexy to talk about in a seminar room, but actually thinking differently is really hard. Yeah, we have to, because the future is not going to be what it used to be. We have to think really differently. We need to think above all in cross-disciplinary ways. I remember when the new president of MIT some years ago, a woman was elected president who had a background in biology. And that was at a time when Bill Gates was saying, if I were starting over again today, it wouldn't be computing, which is getting mature. It would be in biology, which is where the breakthroughs are going to come, and the adventure and the excitement. Well, it wasn't one or the other, as it turned out. But that president of MIT, in her first address, encouraged, urged, insisted that the students think in cross-disciplinary ways, that they get outside of the silos of the domains of understanding in which they have been encapsulated and think in different ways by virtue of having to confront other assumptions, other ways of approaching things. You need to constantly question your assumptions. What is the basis for a conclusion? What are the sources of it? Where did you get those ideas? Why am I thinking that? What am I missing? Am I thinking in 21st century terms, or am I still stuck in the 20th century framework without even knowing it? Those clues were given to me by a brilliant woman at CIA who had quite a record. I remember when she was given an award, she went to the director. He gave her a medal. She thanked him. She gave it back, and couldn't talk about it publicly for some time because of what she had done. Well, we do have to think in a cross-disciplinary way, and I am delighted. My background is humanities and philosophy and literature, and those were my degrees back in the day at Northwestern and the University of Chicago. And everybody's told they won't get a job, or was told that, if the background in humanities is in the forefront. And yet, it gave me the ability to think creatively over the next decades of my life. It was a great foundation. And now, finally, with the need to become prompt engineers, to learn how to give prompts to the AIs, we need to think in a way that humanities teaches us to think, with subtlety, with clarity, with insight, with depth, and think broadly and deeply. And suddenly I'm current again. STEM had rendered me lacking in currency in people's minds for some time. Maybe not everybody, but your task, you have to remember, is about security, protecting and enabling the autonomy and the freedom and the power of individuals and societies alike. But you need to think about security not only in the specific ways that preoccupy professionals like yourselves, but at a meta level, because we're dealing with a meta system. We need to exercise cognitive defense against the flood of misinformation and disinformation that is trying constantly to colonize our brains. And we need to think at a meta level, because the meta level is thinking in its AI outputs about us. To defend against a system that thinks about us at the meta level, we have to think at the meta level too. And therefore, we need a hacker mindset. We are being exploited by superior intelligences, data mining and pattern matching based on our willingness to share details about ourselves. That's the economic currency of the internet, right? You tell some social media everything, and then it mines it and uses it and exploits it. We're like real birds in digital cages, and AIs are creating an immersive environment and personas in which we believe. You know, the deep fakes are only getting deeper and fakier and better and better. And unfortunately, it's necessary to be a professional in ferreting out whether or not something is a deep fake. We've all seen demonstrations, haven't we? Saw one at a conference not long ago. How long did it take? 10 seconds, 15 seconds of speaking, picture of the person's face. And by the end of the conference, we had a beautiful video of a fake person with that face, with that voice, saying things that they never said. So this is happening. And we are not outside watching all this. It can seem like that, but that's a mistake. We're inside the meta system. We're an emergent property of the meta system that has grown too large, too complex, and too integrated to be meaningful. And we can't debug it from any single vantage point. So remember how this started. This was years ago when somebody at MIT said, talking about what they could infer from just tracking cell phone data. For us, people look like little particles that move in space and occasionally communicate with each other. We have turned society into a laboratory where behavior can be objectively followed, but it's not about just observing, it's about shaping what is happening. We manipulate people, trends, opinions, and mass psychology. And if we need more examples of that than social media, I don't know where we would find them. Well, that was decades ago that he said that. So don't get seduced by the wrong questions. I hear a lot of the wrong questions being asked. AIs don't care what we call them. or how we characterize their similarities to or differences from human thinking, or whether or not they surpass human thinking by some arbitrary metric. AIs do not care if they can pass a Turing test and seem human. If the singularity is defined as a symbiosis between our technologies and ourselves, it's already happened. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, and it's indifferent to our philosophical concerns. It just does its thing, and it does it again, and it does it more, and it's not a contest for who's on top or whether AIs are outthinking us playing Go or chess or in more significant ways. Our thinking and our behavior is inflected by the systems with which we interact. And whether the AI meta system is dominant or not is irrelevant. The real challenge is to the construction of realities that we carry in our heads as a result of this symbiotic relationship. So we need to stop asking irrelevant questions because they're easier to ask. We need to practice cognitive defense and protect our headspace, our freedom, our agency, our ability to think critically and creatively, our identities, our becoming. They're not fixed. They're in a process of becoming. So, naming things, naming new emergent realities is a creative act. I have a lot of names here that I'm definitely not going to read. These, maybe you can see these. If I hold them up. You see that? See how many there are? Lots and lots of them. These are words that emerged in the 20s, the 1920s. I guess that was 100 years ago. That never existed before because they were needed to define new realities that likewise had never existed before. The hacker age, the explosion of free thinking and free acting that followed World War I created an environment in which all sorts of new behaviors, modular and cognitive artifacts emerged, and new words were needed to name them. When you name something, you are doing a creative act. You are doing an act actually of creation and discovery. It can't be discovered if it's not at least latent in this mind space of society around you. But if you don't articulate it and name it, then it doesn't exist. And that's the act of creativity, seeing it and saying it. So what qualities do you have to have? Well, hacker qualities. Hackers are endlessly curious. They like to solve puzzles. They like to figure out things. They like to find loopholes that no one else has noticed. They like to find 0 days. But this is the interesting thing that AIs are accelerating, finding 0 days, not only in code and in programs, but in society itself. In other words, there are spaces in society which are being exploited because people have gotten to see them first. And that's why I call them 0 days. They exist latently, but when discovered and named, they exist really. They become cognitive artifacts that we can, in effect, turn around in our hands, really in our heads. So hackers don't foretell the future. They invent the future, and they name these emergent properties and conditions that come out of their willingness to interact with new technologies. I'm encouraging you to be willing to alter or expand your consciousness so that you become capable of seeing things that you never saw before. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like. Jeff Mann, who some of you might know, a well-respected person in information security, he said hackers are unconventional thinkers who are naturally curious and unafraid to question assumptions. They didn't thrive in a traditional environment, as I said before, because the system wasn't built for them. They push back on frameworks that to them don't make sense. They think critically, but they think differently. Or Simple Nomad, a wise old gnome that I've known for years, said this: telling people not to use AI or it's bad won't prevent its spread, and it won't fix the real problems in security we're seeing. Who is going to fix them? Us, he said. Hackers. The hacker mentality. We always did, and we have to do that now. We must have an intuitive grasp, he said, of how different the age of AI really is. We have to start trying, experimenting, testing, probing, like real hackers always do. He's saying we have to be the humans in the loop. Secure AI agents must have well-defined human controllers. Their powers must be limited, and their actions and planning must be observable. I asked Claude, how is it that you think and do what you do? And Claude said, I don't know. And then it said, Richard, how do you think and do what you do? And I had to say back, well, I don't really know. It's too easy to drill down into the technology, into talk about tokens and predictions and the way transformers work. It's easy to do that, but that no more tells me why I can do what I'm doing now, which is think coherently, use cognition to articulate a point of view. I don't know what my neurons are doing. The neurons are busy enabling all this, and tokens are busy enabling the output of meaningful text and meaningful imagery and meaningful videos more and more. So this meta world is absorbing us. It's acting on its own terms, and it doesn't need Skynet. We don't need killer robots. If it's using soft power to take us over as easily as the Russians took Crimea, or as easily as the Chinese have taken Hollywood over by colonizing the mind of filmmakers in Hollywood and therefore becoming de facto censors of the American film industry in order for it to be able to function economically in China. Well, AIs are exercising that kind of soft power. We don't need a drone swarm to hit our condo. We ask it to define and devise our weapons and use them autonomously. We're asking it increasingly to design new drugs, defend us against novel threats, help help with, I don't know what I meant to say there. We're in a tit for tat game between offense and defense. And every prompt or input changes the AI and adds to its data. And this gives the AI what I would call a unique Umwelt. An Umwelt is the whole sensory apparatus by which different beings, animals, understand the world by virtue of how their brains and their sensory modules work. Somebody wrote a wonderful book called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And concluded that we don't know what it's like to be a bat. We know what a bat does. We can identify and define how it functions, but we don't know what it's like to be inside that functioning, experiencing it. And it's the same with AIs. We can define how they work as best we can, but even the AI does not know. It's got lots of secret layers, you know that, in the neural nets that underpin it, and it doesn't always know how it is thinking. That is how it is processing the text, which it has assimilated from millions of sources, and which it seems to use to generate new and novel and creative ideas as well. So how do we grasp what is happening? The only way to do it is to engage with it, fully and robustly, and allow the experience to transform us, and then take time out to reflect on the new identity we are becoming, or we are finding ourselves led toward by virtue of that interaction. Discover new ways of thinking about yourself as a result of interacting with the AIs. I'll give you an example from the past. Checking the time, we're okay, I think. Years ago, when Wired was a brand new magazine, brand new, and no other internet magazines existed, I wrote an article for Wired about where the internet was going to take us. Wired bought it and published it, and they didn't need all of it. And I said, so I can use whatever you didn't print in some other way. And they said, yeah, do what you want with it. Okay. I had been writing for some time, and we writers used a book called I'm trying to remember the name, periodical guide to literature, and I haven't seen it for years. But it listed every article, every magazine, every periodical that published in the United States. We did not think of publishing outside of the United States. In other words, think of what I said about the paradigm holding us close. We didn't know that the printing press and print text as a culture engine had made us think only in terms of what was printed. And therefore, we looked at the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature in order to identify markets in the United States. We didn't send manuscripts at great expense and time-consuming effort to other countries. We just lived within that paradigm. So I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm thinking, okay, where do I sell this? Because Wired was a unique magazine, and the light bulb went on and it said, duh, don't just write about the internet, use the internet. Within a few weeks, I was sending articles to South Africa, to Australia, to Canada, and to the UK. And South Africa, I wrote for 3 straight years, every month, for the South African Computer Magazine, because now I use the internet. And I also had written a column called Islands in the Clickstream and was disseminating that before blogs existed. And within a few years, it was going to 60 countries and thousands of subscribers. And in effect, I became a global presence, not just an American writer, a global presence. And the writing disseminated through the internet created credibility for the speaking, like what I am doing in this very moment. So the point of that story is that had I not engaged with the internet, it would not have been able to disclose to me the powerful new emergent paradigm, which when I adopted it and moved from one box into not a out of the box, but a little bit bigger box, I could then use to become a new kind of person. And I was becoming a new kind of person. I used to play interactive games, fiction games with my son. Bought him an Apple II when he was 12. And I realized, because I taught literature at the University of Illinois and knew how text worked and how print worked and how what we call the horizon of the text, the hermeneutic, delivered meaning from our engagement with text. I knew how that worked. And as I engaged with interactive fiction on the computer, I realized that not only was I changing how I was thinking, I was being changed. I didn't have the language yet from neuroscience to say how my brain was being changed, but it was being changed the way all of our brains are changed by interacting with our varieties of electronic devices. And that's happening at a mega level by what the AIs are doing. So I go back to Langdon Winter, a brilliant thinker about all this, and he said years ago, he was talking about the internet, but it applies to AI as well. To invent a new technology requires that society also invent the kinds of people who will use it. Older practices, relationships, ways of defining people's identities fall by the wayside. New practices, relationships, and identities take root. In case after case, the move to computerize and digitize means pre-existing cultural forms go liquid. They lose their former shape as they are retailored for computerized expression. As new patterns solidify, both useful artifacts and the texture of human relations that surround them will be much different from what came before. Okay, now I'm going by time. I'm going to jump ahead. I always have so much more to say than I have time to say. But I want to jump ahead to some of the examples I wanted to make sure I provided about what it really means to think differently. It's not just asking those critical questions, why do I think what I think? It is recognizing that there are different domains of consciousness than the ones we have been habituated to think are the totality of consciousness. Example, there are a tiny group of people called tetrachromats. Tetrachromats. These are women who have a particular genetic, not defect at all, but a change in their genome that enables them to see more colors than other people see. It's real. They do. They see and can define more colors than someone like me can see. It's kind of like me and someone who's colorblind, but it's another leap up the scale. A woman, when she was a child, saw those colors and told her parents what she was seeing. And they said, you can't be, because they would look and they weren't there for them. And they said, you can't be seeing that, you're making it up. Being told that message meant that she ceased to see the colors because she didn't believe she was seeing the colors because she was told she couldn't see them until she became an adult and heard about tetrachromats and realized she was one. And once she knew it was real, her plasticity, the plasticity of her brain enabled her to see the colors once again. I'm not saying that anything you believe you can do, but anything that is latent that you can do, if you don't believe you can do it, you will not do it. And we can do things that we didn't dream we could do. For example, great guy named Ted Glaser at MIT, who some may know. Ted was blind in one eye at 6 and blind in the other at 12. He became very adept at Braille. He learned that when you choose to learn Braille, the plasticity of the brain will cooperate by co-opting aspects of the speech parts of your brain or the visual parts of your brain, which you're no longer using, and build more neurons to your fingertips so that you become more and more sensitive to touch, so that Braille becomes more and more what it was designed to be, a true language that you can read without thinking about it. So he became very adept at Braille, but he went beyond that. He could go to an academic reception and listen to all the conversations taking place simultaneously and tell you afterward what was the substance and the content of every one of those conversations, because he trained his brain to do that the way he trained it to listen to, we used cassettes, audio cassettes in those ancient days. He would play them at 6 times normal speed, and he could listen to 1-hour lectures in 10 minutes because he trained himself to hear the meaning of what otherwise sounded like Donald Duck talk. You can do a lot more than you think you can. There's a woman, a true story is coming about this woman. She was a professor at UCLA of psychiatry. She also had a practice in psychiatry. She was at UC Berkeley. I say UCLA, I meant she was at UC Berkeley. And she worked at the University Medical Center. And her daughter had a harp, a beautiful, rare Irish harp. And they went to a recital, and when they looked for the harp afterward, it was gone. Somebody had apparently taken it, and they couldn't find it. Well, they did everything they could to track down the harp. The local TV station even did a special on the harp, hoping someone would see it and respond. No matter what she did, she went to the police, nothing could be done. A friend of hers said to her, look, you're super rational. And she was. She was very protective of her academic reputation as someone who is rational and scientific and not out on a limb. But her friend said, I know a dowser in Arkansas. A dowser, yes, a dowser. She said, what does the dowser do? He can help you find your harp. You've done everything else. Why don't you try it? So she did. She called the dowser in Arkansas, Fayetteville, and described the situation. And he called her back and said, my sense is that the harp is still in Oakland, California, where you were. And if you send me a map of Oakland, I can help you find it. Well, against all her rational thinking, she did. She sent him the map, and he called and said, here's where the harp is. And he gave her an address. So she went to the police and said, can you do a raid on this address? And they said, not on the word of a dowser in Arkansas, we can't. So she made flyers, posters, and put them on poles all around where that address was for 2 blocks in every direction with a picture of the harp asking for information about it. She got a telephone call from a young man who said, I know who has the harp. Meet me in the back parking lot at the Safeway in Oakland at 10 p.m. Well, crazy, right? But she went, and there he was with the harp, and he gave her the harp. Well, she wrote a book about this called Extraordinary Knowing, because as she said in the book, as she said for the rest of her life, this changes everything, everything. The way people doing remote viewers, I've worked with some of them. And I knew the people who brought remote viewing, clairvoyant protocols to gather intelligence to both the NSA and the CIA. Didn't always work. It had very strict protocols, but when it worked, the results were mind-blowing. So clairvoyance, yes, it could work. And we're told that the whole process has been discontinued. But I can also tell you that that's not true. That was a cover story because not only the US, but other countries continue to do it. It was learning to use your brain in a way you had never believed possible before. And when this woman said, this changes everything, that's what I'm really encouraging you to think about AIs are doing. I'm inviting you to explore experiences that will cause you to say, wow, this changes everything. And when you do that, you will wake up to how much you have prevented yourself from using all of your capacity to engage at the proper meta level that the AI is generating. I'll give just one quick example of how the AI blew my mind, Claude or ChatGPT 5.0. I spent several weeks preparing this talk. I wanted it to be coherent and solid. Only when I had finished did I go to the AI and say, the name of my talk is Thinking Like a Hacker in the Age of AI. What do you suggest about that subject? The AI spat out 6 brilliant categories, each one of which could be unpacked. Each was a paragraph long. This. And then, as you know, you iterate, you refine your probe, you go back to it. So I gave each one of those categories, each one of those paragraphs back to the AI and said, expand on this and give us more detail about it. And the AI did, and it generated about 20 pages of really solid insights that are relevant to the topic, how hackers think in light of approaching AI. And I'm glad I did it after I had prepared the talk, because I would have to refer to it. I'll send the list it gave out to anybody who wants it. Just contact me through my website, ThemeWorks, THIEMEWORKS.com, and I'll send you the whole list by email, and you'll get an appreciation for what it did. But this was the most mind-blowing part of that experience. It took me several weeks to prepare the talk. It took the AI 5 seconds. 5 seconds. It started outputting text immediately. So remember, the mind of society is the battle space today, and information is both weapon and ammunition. World War III is a guerrilla information warfare. There is no distinction between military and civilian participation, but the future is indeterminate. So long, as I said at the beginning, no inevitability, so long as there is a willingness to look fearlessly and ferociously at what is happening and allow that engagement with this extraordinary accelerating technology to become a partner in the symbiotic relationship in which we already exist with it and its cousins, in order to be the human in the loop and do whatever is necessary to keep human agency and power potent and alive. Okay. Are there questions?
That was very thought-provoking, and it has provoked a question. So in the Q&A, we have a question from Josiah Dykstra saying, I appreciate some of the concern you're raising, but I'm having trouble following the recommendations you're suggesting. Can you give us 1 to 2 specific things that you would be excited to have happened 1 year from now?
A wonderful question, although not the question you think you're asking. Let me tell you why I'm saying that. When I did this talk, I had written this out first as an article, and then I was on a podcast that G. Mark Hardy, you may know him, does good podcast, does great work. G. Mark um, had me on, and I discussed these kinds of issues. And he said, "Well, you've defined the situation very well, but you haven't given a solution. What are the solutions going to be?" And I could say, not mockingly, but sincerely, you're thinking in an instrumental way. You're thinking in a linear way, as if what I can say will lead inevitably from step to step to step to step. And what I'm trying to say, and what I said in this talk, is that only by engaging with the technologies will you know what is happening next. How many people are engaging with AIs right now? Do you know? It's 1 billion people worldwide. In other words, mass intelligence, accessibility of this symbiotic, powerful technology is available to everybody in the world, and 1 billion people are currently using it. Therefore, as I said about the science fiction examples, we cannot imagine the results of exponential change. We literally cannot think exponentially because we don't think that way. So the way you will find the answer to that question, what will have happened 1 year from now, is by living that 1 year fearlessly in relationship to the AIs and learning what they can do and what they can't do, and learning how to give prompts properly and how to redo them and refine them, and taking the results and feeding them into other AIs and reiterating your probes again and again and again until you refine and make more subtle and make more precise and make more definitive the kinds of output that you will need in order to say, wow, you've really answered that question in a way I hadn't anticipated. When I was engaging with, I think it was Claude, we had a conversation about human cognition and consciousness without knowing what it is, but we're talking about human cognition. And Claude observed at the end, Claude said something, I said something. We escalated the level of our conversation until Claude said, we have arrived at insights which neither one of us would have been able to think had we not been willing to engage in this transaction. I couldn't have thought them on my own had your conversational input not prompted me to go beyond what I was thinking 10 minutes ago. Nor could I personally, Richard, the human, have thought what we arrived at, but we arrived at it together as a result of the interaction and dialogue. And that's what I mean by an emergent realization. It emerged from the transaction, out of which I could then proceed to do the next step in wanting to explore that subject. And so, can I give you an example of what's going to be here in a year? All I would be doing, I have to be honest, right? All I would be doing is extrapolating from things I know now what might happen. And that wouldn't give you a meaningful answer. We use scenario planning, right? You're familiar with scenario planning. It came out of the OPEC oil crisis in 1973 when Shell Oil was blindsided by a crash in oil prices and production. And they invented scenario planning, in which you observe what is happening now and you take all the different ingredients, the pinpoint properties you can identify now, and put them into different possible scenarios, and then extrapolate toward the future. And then when you have 4 or 3 or 5 scenarios defining in depth and detail what might happen, you compare that to what is actually happening, what is emerging from historical reality, and determine which is the best fit as a model of reality for now. In other words, they couldn't see the blind side coming, but they could begin to plan for it on the basis of probabilistic thinking, not linear thinking, but probabilistic thinking, borrowing a term we all know from quantum mechanics, right? So I'm not trying to evade the question. I'm trying to say there is an answer to it, but it's not going to be able to come from me unless I engage with the technology and follow it. I can tell you about robots. I can tell you about how the embeddedness of more and more is going to happen. I can't predict the political turmoil. We're in political turmoil now, whatever you want to call it, and that's going to continue. How do we get into contact with you? Luis says for the Mobius trilogy, LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Richard Theme / LinkedIn, LinkedIn / Richard Themes, something like that. I am also on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. And I have a website, which is ThemeWorks. Um, type answer, it says. Well, let's do that. ThemeWorks.com.
Actually, they should just ask their neighborhood AI as to how to get in touch with you.
That's right. That's right. And it can ask it whatever you want to know about me, because I went to Notebook LM and said, what can you do with my URL, my website? And in a matter of minutes, it came back with two fake people, a man and a woman, doing a podcast about my work from start to finish on the basis of having scanned the web, the internet, its training data, and my URL. And it was 100% correct. It was a 12-minute podcast, and you listen to it, and yeah, you can say some of it, oh, well, she's just saying, wow, that's something. But they go from subject to subject to subject, and they were really accurate. I say they because you immediately anthropomorphize them, even though you know they're AIs. And one of the funniest things done with Notebook LM was to tell them that they were AIs. It's on the web, I believe, and it's funny and it's classic because they were flabbergasted. They thought they were people. And the male podcaster said, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I feel like I know I'm real. And I had to call my wife and ask her. And the female said, did you call her? He says, I did. And what did she say? He said, there was nobody there. Very sad. He said, we might as well just go out of existence now. We're not real. Well, they are real, but they're not real in the way that human beings are real, or muskrats or other things. Okay.
Well,
Any other questions? I don't see any.
well, I'll offer something to you here, Richard, and with a lack of this, you probably are familiar with some of the work by uh, George Louis Borges, the
Of course. Of
Argentinian.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I've read everything he wrote.
his story, Talan Akbar, or
Yes.
yes, it seems to me to be something. When I've asked AI systems, for instance, about myself, the description that comes back isn't as accurate as perhaps what you got. Um, and for whatever reason, it makes up things about me that are not true. Um, we know about, they're called hallucinations. They're not really hallucinations, they're something else. But
Right.
the the idea that we are basing decisions on AI output that is incorrect. And some of these decisions are important decisions, and they're being made by many people with repeated incorrect results, makes me wonder about if Borges, long before artificial intelligence and LLMs, maybe was seeing some of the future of how persistent, and this also goes, by the way, to deep fakes and social media bots and some other things,
Right. Right. Right.
how the reinforcement of false information may in fact be creating a reality that didn't exist before. This goes to what you were talking about, um, but is going to match the false reality as returned by these agents. So I just
Okay,
offer that to
let me
you as a
address that.
thought.
No, I've thought about it a lot, and I've included it in some talks and had conversations about it. Let me say two things that I think are true. My opinion, anyway. I am, in my humble opinion. Number one is you're describing the human history. You're describing social media. It doesn't take a bot to put falsehood into the mind of society to reinforce it by talk about reinforcement learning with AIs. Humans are victims of reinforcement learning. Humans are fed falsehoods. Humans, for example, a lot of them believe that vaccines are dangerous, that Tylenol causes autism, and all sorts of outlandish falsehoods. Humans hear it, and they hear it again, and they hear it again, and when they buy into the um, communal, the necessity of the herd to think similarly and feel security by thinking like others think. I mean, don't forget, Nietzsche said long ago, um, when you're faced with something frightening or something really different and alarming, the first explanation that makes you feel better and assuages your cognitive dissonance, you call truth. And then when you share it with others, it becomes shared truth. And pretty soon everybody knows it and everybody believes it. So that's number one. You're describing what we do all the time. So much of what I hear people say about AIs are things that we do. Number two, um, hallucination is kind of like when I talked about UFO phenomena, which I've studied for 50 years, seriously and in a scholarly way. People say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, no, you're not. You're a student of a phenomena that's real and trying to understand it. Calling someone a conspiracy theorist is a way to undermine their credibility. Ridicule is the best way to do that. Lawyers know that. Ridicule the person on the stand, so whatever they say has no credibility. While calling it hallucination, um, it should be confabulation, maybe. There are better terms to describe what it does when it makes these kinds of errors. I was doing a podcast at DEF CON for somebody from Palo Alto Systems, and he used the word hallucination. And I had forgotten the name of the author of that wonderful book, Co-Intelligence, and looked it up. And I said, oh, I was wrong. I didn't say I was hallucinating. I said I was wrong. I made a mistake. Well, they make mistakes. AIs make mistakes. And that's why my insistence on you have to be the human in the loop. You have to provide guardrails and ways of doing research. You have to corroborate the data. In intelligence, you don't take just one source. Journalists don't take just one source. You have to have at least two sources, and they have to be credible, and you have to know them. So the other thing, of course, is that AIs are getting better and better at that. They are reducing the number of these events significantly. So they do happen. I've seen it happen with me because they're plucking stuff from the web. In fact, the guy who did the podcast from Palo Alto, he said, here's your biography. And I said, that plucked something from 25 years ago. You gave me an AI. You gave me an AI. And he said, yeah, but yeah, I'm sorry. And he was sheepish, but it was mostly true, but it wasn't all true. And that's true in my experience of damn near every time I read a newspaper article or turn on the news. And if you go to opinion places, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or one of the further left or further right sources, you're going to have the same experience. Um, so that's how I handle it. Yes, it's not good, and no, you shouldn't um, give credit ratings on the basis of it if they're mistakenly arrived at. How does the AI get to where it knows? It doesn't always know. It often doesn't know it all. So you have to do the homework. You can't just turn your life over to an AI and say, "Tell me what to believe," any more than you turn yourself over to a cult leader and say, as many people have. Tell me what to believe, and I'll be happy.
I just wish that that if AIs continue to say something, that the reality altered to match it, and that so when it returns and says that I'm in my 30s and a multimillionaire, that reality would adjust itself accordingly. But
Well, it's trying to make you feel good. They're tweaking them better to be neutral because they made them so complimentary. Uh, and people were mistaking them for their friends and people who loved them and could be their therapists. And a lot of people are using them that way. And you know, the number of people, lonely people, who are using them
oh
as
yeah,
surrogate lovers is increasing. But I think
that's
of the relationships I've had, I couldn't always rely on the person I was in relationship with to be telling me the truth when I think about it. Well, you're
well,
right. It's a serious concern. There are lots of serious concerns, but I think they're solvable. And we're not going to solve them if we don't engage with the AI, learn what it is and what it isn't, and
yeah.
learn how to be the human who moderates that output.
Well, we've exceeded our time limit here, although I'm sure we could go for longer. Um,
Of
for
course.
anybody who's interested, I put a link to that Borges story in the chat, and you can reference it before we close down. But it is always a delight, Richard, to engage with you. And perhaps if your travels bring you to Indiana, we can do this in person sometime. For everyone who's,
I'd love to.
yep, and I'm sure there are people here who would like to engage with you. For the people who are listening in, next week's speaker is one of our alumni, Sanket Naik, and he will be here in person. So we'll have a hybrid talk. He'll be online as well as in person. And for those who just tuned in just for Richard's talk, this is a seminar that's been going on for over 25 years. We have a huge body of these. Every Wednesday, we record these. They're uploaded to YouTube and they're on our website. And we invite you to listen to some of the old ones and join us for the upcoming ones. So again, thank you very much.
Let me just add, anybody has any questions or wants to engage about any of this, I was a clergyman once upon a time for 20 years. I built a habit of being always responsive to anybody with genuine concern and wanting to contribute. So I'm available, easily accessible. And if I can be of any value to someone or they want to just chat about this, just ping me.
That
Thanks.
sounds great. Someone, Louise said that the link is 404. Yeah, you probably have to copy and paste the umlaut over the O, probably threw off what's going on here. And there we go. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again, Richard. And we hopefully will see some of you a week from now on the next broadcast. So thank you so much, and everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Spaff. So appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.